November 1st, 2022, general meeting, V1 electric board to order. The first agenda item is the agenda check. Does anybody have any comments or questions about the agenda this evening?
I'll just make a quick comment. I know we have some time tonight for budget. I think it's total like 40 minutes set aside. A handful of questions that I share of 10 minutes. Anyway, I just wanted to flag that. Not sure if that'll be sufficient, but perhaps there's enough room.
I'm sure we'll figure out a way to accommodate it.
Cool.
All right, thank you for the heads up. Anything else? Then the next agenda item is going to be items from board members and general manager. I think I'll start with the general manager this evening.
Thank you, President Brown. Just one procedural reminder. We did get quite a few questions prior to the meeting, and just to make, we had a couple of different answer threads going on. Just a reminder to commissioners to copy the general manager and the GM office. You can also copy the senior staff as well, the executive team. But we had a couple of different response threads going on for people. Just as a reminder, glad to get the questions, glad to get our responses, but just a reminder procedurally. Thank you.
Matt? Anything? No. Okay. Mindy? Sonia?
I know that EWEB Run to Stay Warm is coming up. I signed up for it. We'll see if I can.
How did that
Otherwise, I'll be there to cheer others on. But I just want to remind others to sign up. It's usually a fun event.
The only thing I have is I attended Coburg Elementary a week ago or so and presented the fifth grader with this second place poster. And as I've done that for many, many years, and it's always fun to watch the kids light up when they get notified, but more importantly, to see their interest in what we do. I mean, I had a ton of questions and it was really fun. And so I kind of really enjoy it. So thank you for whomever let me do that opportunity. I appreciate it. Other than that, that's it. The next agenda item, if there's nothing else from the board or general manager, will be the public input. And before I gavel into public input, I'll just say that if you're participating by telephone, remember to unmute your call, press *6. If calling from a landline, or simply use the unmute button. If calling from your cell phone. When you're, and for in-person speaking this evening, when your name is called, please come forward and clearly state your name and optionally your address or ward. Each speaker will be offered 3 minutes to present their testimony. Please keep track of time by watching the timer at the front of the room or by listening for an audio notification when 3 minutes has lapsed. After all testimony is heard, each commissioner will have an opportunity to speak if they choose, although by policy, we do not engage in a back and forth dialogue. Please note that a failure of a commissioner to speak shall not be construed as support of or opposition to any speaker's testimony. If a question is presented to a speaker and the board does not provide an answer, the EWEB staff member will contact the speaker so the question can be addressed at a later time. This time, I will open the public testimony period, and first is Mr. Smith on the phone. Oh, are you there?
Yes, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Thank you very much. You're on, and please address the board with whatever is your concern or things. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, William Smith, Ward 1, and I'm here to talk about wireless meter technology and possible alternatives. Recently, I saw a mailing from EWEB, a newsletter, I guess, called Water, Power, and People. It focused on determining the future of the Leebird hydroelectric project and outlined 4 alternatives. And I thought, wow, this is great. Wouldn't it be wonderful if EWEB were to launch a similar project on determining the future of customer empowerment related to meters? And I thought, well, okay, well, what might that look like? And of course, you might have option or alternative number 1 being the wireless meter technology that continues to be rolled out, and many people are concerned about, and some are getting sick. And I have gotten sick after our whole block got installed with meters, and a few of us opted out But nevertheless, kind of like secondhand smoke, it's affecting me and others. So anyway, the continued wireless meter alternative might be one. Number two might be analog meters. And I thought of a possible number three that might intrigue you all, and that is fiber optic connected meters. You may know that fiber optics have incredibly good economics. Once the initial investment is made of putting them in the ground, they tend to be very low cost to maintain, and those savings could be passed on to customers. And also you get unlimited bandwidth at very little cost. So EWEB might like that in terms of the information that that you all seem to be interested in using to help manage your end of things. So I hope you'll consider that as a possible win-win and a way to empower people without making them sick. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Smith. Anybody else? In the next speaker will be Chris Jones.
I come up here.
Yeah, just come up and sit down, please. Thank you.
Good evening, commissioners, staff. My name is Chris Jones, and I live on Kincaid Street in South Eugene. And I'm coming to you tonight with a compliment and also a small suggestion. I worked for EWEB for a few years, and I became, as a result, kind of an infrastructure nerd. Every time I'd be driving around with my spouse, I'd be pointing out, transformers and insulators and circuit breakers and oil-filled circuit breakers right next to the river and all sorts of great stuff. And she used to give me a hard time and tell me that she couldn't see any of it. And so imagine my delight as we were taking a trip up the Mackenzie River a couple of months ago, when we could finally agree on something, which was that there were 28 miles of EWEB transmission line that ran from the Leeburg generation facility down to Walterville. Neither of us could see them. And that's because EWEB had removed them after building a new substation. They were no longer needed. So this was, I think, 28 miles of line that ran across farm fields and across school athletic fields and all through the woods, requiring all sorts of vegetation management. And EWEB, through a lot of hard work from engineers and construction and line crews and property management folks and the people who pay the bills, they were able to remove those lines, and it's a beautiful thing. So I just wanted to acknowledge that, sometimes when you go out and you see that there's nothing there, that's because there are a lot of people who did a lot of hard work to make that nothing appear. So good job. My very small request is completely unrelated, and it's related to the budget and rates that Ms. Hart will be presenting later tonight. And I noticed it's in your packets in Appendix B, Table 7, which is that in a residential bill, this is a bit of wonkery, but on a residential bill, it's still broken out in an energy charge and a delivery charge. And those charges are presented to the customer. And I've asked for years, and I've never got an answer that I found satisfactory as to why those two charges are still somewhat confusingly presented to the customer, instead of the customer just seeing, here's your charge per kilowatt hour. I can understand possibly in a commercial setting having charges for different things and making the bill a little bit more complicated. But I urge you in 2023 to be brave and bold and continue on the road of continuous improvement for EWEB and consolidate that charge to a single kilowatt hour charge for the residential customers. You can still do whatever you want in the background. I don't need to see it. So thank you. Thanks for your time and all your hard work. Have a good night.
Is there anybody else signed up to speak this evening? If not, then I would close public input and I'll ask for comments from commissioners. Address either individual. Sonia.
See you. Thank you for coming out. Appreciate you taking the time to come down and share your thoughts. And to the gentleman in line, thank you for sharing your thoughts as well.
I'd like to back check on that too, Chris, because I was around when they started that project and I mean, that's been what, 8 or 10 years ago when they started doing that. And we talked about the right of way and removal of the pole lines. I noticed we just had a legal notice in the paper about abandoning that particular corridor and things such as that. I think my understanding of the reason we have the two charges, the base rate and the kilowatt rate, is because of, I have meters that I don't use any consumption. And if I don't use any consumption and you bury the base rate into the usage rate, then I mean, people will say, well, how come I'm getting a bill because I haven't used 1 kilowatt? And I haven't, I just have a meter, but I'm not using it. And so if Frank or Rod wants to expand on that.
I'll certainly understand in the present environment where Chris is referring to the delivery charge and the energy charge, both being based on kilowatt hours. It's a bit redundant to split that into 2 categories. The reason that we started to look at 2 categories instead of 1 is eventually we would like to have a demand charge associated with the residential environment as well, to be able to address peaks in a little different way. So right now it is redundant. He's correct. It's a little bit confusing, but we have a lot of work to do around rate design in the next couple of years, and that's a piece of it.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Any other questions or comments? If not, thank you for attending, and thank you, Mr. Smith, for providing your input. So I've closed the public input. Now the next agenda item is consent calendar A. Anybody have anything they want to move or discuss? If not, I will entertain a motion. Any discussion? All those in favor by saying aye. That's unanimously. Consent calendar B. Anything to be removed or discussed? Not, up next, a motion to adopt.
Move to approve.
Seconded by Schlossberg. Any discussion? Not all those in favor, signify by saying aye. Aye, passes unanimously. Thank you very much. Next,
Brown?
yes.
I just wanted to make a note, just in case people are listening or watching, that Commissioner Borofsky is not in attendance this evening. And while I'm not the one who makes the determination, I believe the board president can decide whether that is an excused absence or not. But I just wanted to make note of that for the public.
For the record, yes, it was an excused absence. He's on an extended vacation, and good for him. And I hope to be able to have somebody say that about me in a couple of months. Thank you very much for correcting me on that. Just for the record, we do have a public hearing that's scheduled to start at 6:45. The next agenda item is 15 minutes, so we can do the math, but I will at 6:45 reopen and look to the crowd and see if there's anybody that wants to provide public input on the public hearing. So the next agenda item is Deborah Hart and the proposed budgets and prices. Thank you.
Last time, which is hand that over to the very capable finance manager, Tia Marie Harwood.
Good evening, commissioners and staff. Tia Marie Harwood, Financial Services Manager, and with me this evening is Erin Ballmer, Fiscal Services Supervisor, and Elise Borges, Lead Financial Analyst. So we were before you last month to discuss the updates made to the long-term financial plans and the draft budgets that staff prepared. This evening, we are here to review the 2023 proposed budgets and updates to prices, which will be followed by the first of 2 public hearings. After the public hearing, we will seek board direction on the 2023 proposed budgets and prices, thereby allowing staff to prepare and bring forth the final 2023 budgets and price proposals for the December 6th board meeting. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Erin to provide a summary of the proposed budgets and prices.
Thank you, Tia. Good evening, commissioners. So as part of the materials for this evening, the draft budget document was prepared and contains additional details, which I won't cover in the interest of time. We're certainly open to any questions you may have on the information presented there. So on this slide is a grid representative of the 4 buckets monitored for budget authority. Board policy establishes that each utility shall have an O&M and a capital budget. Details in attachment 1 of the budget document correspond to the figures noted on the screen. I will say a quick note for next month is that staff anticipate requesting budget amendments for the current year. So at the October meeting, draft budget figures were presented. And since then, staff have compiled further detail on draft budgets and price proposals consistent with the DFE. There are not any substantive changes from drafts presented last month. Now, in the spirit of full transparency, classifications of balance sheet changes for the electric utility were refined, and the electric O&M figure has decreased by $3.1 million from figures presented in October. This is a presentation item with zero effect on revenue requirements previously committed. As a special note with respect to Leberg, that is that the current budgets include $2 million for emergent work. Funding for the path forward there will be further developed and defined in the context of the 2024 long-term financial plan budget planning cycle. So financially there, we have plenty of runway to work. So as a recap to revenue requirements for 2023 and remembering where long-term financial plans indicate we need to go into the future, the water utility is modeling a 6% revenue requirement increase for 2023, with further increases needed in coming years to support planned infrastructure investments. Most notably, there are large storage projects in the Willamette treatment plant on the horizon. Price proposals for 2023 allocate increases evenly across billing components for each customer class. The electric utility is modeling a 3.25% revenue requirement increase for 2023 and projecting the same thing in each of the next 3 years. 2023 price proposals for the electric utility emphasize the increase in the basic charge for residential, small, and medium general service customers. The emphasis on the basic charge in these customer classes is meant to capture results from the COSA indicating a higher basic charge to better match fixed costs of the utility. In the context of rate-making principles, this is a step to further employ rates on a cost basis. The business growth and retention credit is proposed to adjust to 0. This credit is calculated annually based on the difference between the forward price curve in wholesale markets and the average energy price for retail customers. So when wholesale prices are less than retail rates, any incremental value a new customer load brings is shared between EWEB and the customer. Since 2023, forward prices are above retail, that is reduced to 0. And a final note on this slide is that the pilot time of use rate schedules are proposed for removal. The pilot program has proved concepts and considerations for future products and services. But we only have one customer on the time of use rate. They are transitioning off at the end of the year. The current process requires additional administrative effort as it is manual. A new billing system as part of the EWEB Enterprise Solutions project will better enable future time of use rate options. So COSA, EWEB's cost of service analysis, is a mechanism by which the utility allocates its costs among customer classes. There are many rows of numbers on this slide, but they tell a story. Last year, staff brought a multi-year COSA to the board. It provided a 3-year rate trajectory based on projected information we had at that time. 2023 was year 2 in that analysis and is the top row of numbers. This is where we thought we'd be a year ago. In the second row are updated following changes in the long-term financial plan in 2023 draft. Revenue requirements and consumption figures among customer classes were consistent from last year till now. Bottom row represents price changes among customer classes for 2023. Those prices correlate to the results for retail customers and correspond with the updated results for wholesale customers per contract terms. Price proposals for elevation charges firmly incorporate the principle of gradualism while maintaining sufficiency. Color the 2023 increase for this customer class to 3 times the overall required, an increase of 6%. There are tables with further detail in the price proposals provided with the meeting materials this evening. Moving on to the electric utility. Similarly, last year, staff brought a multi-year COSA to the board, provided a 3-year rate trajectory based on the information we had at the time. 23 again was year 2 in that analysis and is the top row of numbers. Figures in the second row are updated based on a roll forward of the COSA model using 2023 draft budgets. And the bottom row represents proposed price changes among customer classes for 2023. Proposed changes among retail classes correlate with figures. We want to highlight the shift in the large general service class. That is the result of a customer class audit and shifting activity among customer classes. Overall customer counts increased, though the large general service customer class is now receiving a smaller piece of the cost pie compared to last year. Comparatively, costs allocated to the medium general service class saw increases, as some customers previously included in the large general service class have shifted to the medium. Excuse me. In the context of holding flat the street lighting customer class, gradualism is employed so as not to unnecessarily reduce prices in one year, only to have a need for larger increases in a future year. Prior year COSA modeling indicated an increase needed in 2024. Finally, in private lighting, prior year results indicated a 26% increase was needed for 2022. Gradualism was employed to smooth rate impacts over time. A 12% increase was implemented last year. Current year analysis indicates further increases are needed, and as such, they are. So affordability is a core value, and there are several comparative measures shown on this slide. In the upper left, combined electric and water bills equate to just over 3.5% of median household income. This measure has shown a declining trend over the past 5 years, decreasing by just over 0.5%. This is indicating increasing affordability for customers. Oregon governmental agencies consider households to be energy burdened with their energy bill is 6% or more. For EWEB's average all-electric customer with consumption at levels used for purposes of the MHI affordability measure, that's 1,050 kilowatt hours. Households making $24,000 or less would classify as energy burdened. For a single-family all-electric residence, as modeled in the bar charts, a household making less than $34,000 would be classified as energy burdened. EWEB continues to uphold the customer care program, which provides approximately 10% of annual average water and electric expenses to at least 5% of the residents. Levels of community support are periodically at additional scale by donations from. Lower right on this slide, Consumer Price Index tracks inflation across broad. Overall year-over-year inflation as of September 2022 was 8.2%. Within the proverbial basket of goods and services used to measure CPI, electric and water services are specifically measured items. Year inflation for water is measured at 4.0%. Remembering the proposal for EWEB water is a 6% increase to residential customers. I'd like to highlight, with a 6% increase, the water utility is positioning for large storage projects in the near future. These large investments in infrastructure, we be well positioned to propose increases in for electric service, inflation there has been at 15.5% year over year. While the proposal for EWEB service is to have a 4% increase for residential customers. Bar charts. So the bar charts are showing current pricing among comparator utilities. This is not a proposed pricing. Water utility is showing headroom among comparators. And the electric utility is leaning to the right of the middle pack. So dollar amount increases at proposed rates and at these comparative consumption levels, $6.08 for the electric utility and $2.11 for the water. Finally, I'd like to acknowledge efforts by staff this evening. Building the budget is a heavy lift and it's a collaborative effort across the utility, and I want to highlight a dedicated and knowledgeable finance team behind this work. Some are here this evening in the room, and I know others are watching. And I just want to say thank you for all the effort and work done to bring us this far. So with that, President Brown.
Thank you very much. Very informative. So we've got only 2 minutes left in this particular item, but we've got a public hearing scheduled at 6:45. We're way ahead of schedule. And I know we've got one commissioner who's got a lot of questions. And so if you don't mind, I'll just acquiesce to Matt and go for it.
All right, thank you. Thanks for the presentation and that additional information. I'm happy to see us looking at the rate compared to income. I think that's super helpful, and yeah, so thanks for doing that. I also want to say that as always, you have created a budget document that I feel like I can read, and even to the point of putting footnotes on exactly where I'm going to ask a question, right? You see, you know how I'm reading this, right? There's something different than last year, and scratching my head, and there's a footnote that says, well, this is why that is. So thank you for sparing me a whole bunch of questions that way, and just for the thoroughness of the work there. I appreciate what you just mentioned about inflation and our rates. Just to make a note that we're in a period of just extremely high inflation right now, and our rates, like, well, some of them are projected to go up by 5% or so, which makes me a little uncomfortable, but we're still, from my perspective, doing a really reasonable job of not letting that get away. So, and keeping it well under the rates of inflation. So I think is on the whole, it's great. I also want to say, forgive my ignorance, this is just the second time I've gone through a budgeting process, so I have some questions that are a little more procedural and ignorant perhaps, so my apologies for that. And then I have just a handful of questions, but they're in no particular order. One, we have the breakdown of the proposed rates for the water side and the electric side, and the water side had detailed revenues, right? It showed the proposed rate and then what the overall revenue would be. And I can give page numbers. I think that's probably useful just to kind of go through here a piece at a time. So the water price proposal section has, sorry. On page 22 shows like the annual revenue based on different, based on the proposed pricing. But the electric side doesn't do the same thing, doesn't break it down in that same way. Is there a reason we don't break it down that way on the electric side? I just found it really helpful to see how this was broken down and how kind of each of these pieces built the whole revenue. And I didn't see it on the electric side.
What's the table number?
Table 13. Table 13. And I think all the rest of the information is the same. It's just that revenue kind of aggregate revenue place.
So you're okay with just parking that when you get back? A question, thank you.
Yeah, nothing urgent. I just found that helpful. And kind of a building onto that is my question about non-rate revenues, revenues that are grants or are our line of like green products, and actually that's part of where my question goes to. I'm not sure where or if that green product revenue line shows up on the electric. I guess that's it. Like, I don't see the revenue side kind of really clearly on the electric side where I can understand how that's built. And so again, going into that question about the green products, I know we'd kind of given the nod as a board on the green products line spring, if I'm not mistaken, April-ish or something. And so I suspect that's baked into this next year's revenue. Do we have any detail about what that's expected to be?
Provide that, we can provide that detail. It's rolled into other revenue.
Okay.
Sales.
Okay, and so-
We'll go ahead and provide that information
Okay.
in detail.
Okay, great, thank you. All right, and then just, you can stop me anytime, Brown. Oh, all right, cool. So then I'm gonna go into just the overall budget document, and on page 14, I'm looking at the electrification incentive. So last year it was $600,000, and this year we've doubled it, looks like, to just over 1.2 million. And I understand and appreciate the back and forth and in advance of the call. So I understand the electrification incentives are both for transportation and building incentives. Do you have a sense of what part is what? Like, is that mostly EV incentives, or is it mostly building incentives, or is it? Do we have a sense of how that's broken out
I believe it's mostly for EVs.
for EVs? Right, because we have funding from the state to help support our
Yes.
incentives. Do
You
you
know,
know?
a lot of that is tied to the value of clean fuels credits.
Right, right.
And those are continuing to increase when we monetize those.
Right.
So it's basically the state, in this case, has placed a value on carbon emissions.
Right.
And emissions reduction, and they're feeding that back into organizations like EWEB, and we in turn
Right.
use it for that additional purpose.
Right, and in the pre-meeting back and forth, you suggested that the state's thinking, or they might have something like that for buildings in the future that will help us make these investments more economic.
Yeah, I think that when you look at a lot of electrification, if it stands on its own economically, it's a challenge for the utility, for a utility that's actually in the Northwest, where it's the return is very difficult. But if you monetize emissions reductions and can use that, then there's the additional incentive of the value to the climate. So that was sort of the basis for your response to your earlier question.
Right, so I guess my question is how much of this total incentive, what 1.2 million that we're proposing is for buildings, and that's coming from ratepayers? And how much of that then is gonna pay the utility back? Or is that, I mean, if we're spending $250,000 on incentives, I mean, it's just making that number up. I don't think that's probably what it is, but maybe somewhere in there. If we're spending $250,000 on incentives for electrification, are those gonna likely to pay the utility back or no?
No.
And so we have some assessment of what amount of like economic what amount of electrification incentive pays back the utility, and you feel like it's less than $250,000 a year. I threw that number out.
Whatever the hypothetical number would be, that's where there's a couple of challenges to that is that the amount of incentive to drive behavior would need to be significant enough, of which the utility would then have to recover that in their retail margin, not just their retail rate, their retail margin.
Right.
And because we're relatively low priced and low margin,
Right.
that would take an incentive that's greater than what we could provide to alter that behavior.
Right. I don't think there's much in the way of incentives for buildings that pay us back at this point.
Right. There are some game changers to that, so I want to be optimistic about that. A number of the state and federal programs, the IRA program, for example, is a game changer there. And also if there's a monetized price on carbon that goes beyond the clean fuels credit, or as part of a program like that would definitely be a game changer for utilities in the Northwest Lansing. But
Right, okay, but absent those policies,
Yeah.
it's not gonna make much sense for us. Thank you, I appreciate the, yeah, me understand that. All right, going to page 18 on a totally different topic, I'm looking at the page 18 in the whole budget document there. The line on insurance, and you even made a footnote, you said the insurance premiums increased, they went from last year from 1.1 million, or almost 1.2 million to $2 million budgeted for this coming year. Can you speak at all to the drivers behind, it says the coverage includes property liability and cybersecurity. Guessing that fire insurance has gone up. I'm just curious, like, it's just, there's a huge jump and I'm wondering what that is.
There,
Can I just jump in? That was another question another commissioner had, and it was answered in the pre-meeting.
My apologies, I missed it. I'll go back and read it.
It's in there. I think it's a pretty good explanation.
All right, we'll skip that then.
I was gonna have to look up that one to make sure I didn't conflict myself.
I guess liability trips down to that.
It's liability insurance, so a couple of reasons.
Okay, all right, thank you. All right, so then I'm going to the electric price proposal. On page 18, table 8. And I think I'm reading this right, but I'm not sure, but when we look at the percent impact on bills, so it's broken down by the usage range from smaller users at the top, using large users of electricity in ranges at the bottom. And the percent increase in price is like 6.18% for small users. But then the percent increase in price tapers down to like 3% for really large users, like 26. So we're having a higher rate increase, the way I'm reading this, higher rate increase for smaller users and a lower rate increase for bigger users, is that right?
That is a function of putting the majority of the rate increase on the basic charge, which is the fixed cost recovery component.
It's just baked into this table. I see, okay. So there's a bit of, I think then, there's a bit of a regressive qualification to our right, there's regressiveness built into our rates, right? Is that right?
So when we reviewed the cost of service this year, our model did indicate that our basic charge was insufficient to cover the fixed costs associated with that. And so that's the effect that you see is a proposal that is assigning fixed costs to a fixed charge.
Right.
So for our lowest users, they will see a higher percentage increase than our highest volume.
Okay, I guess I'm concerned that I suspect that some of our lower users, although this may be an incorrect assumption, but that some of our lower users are families living in smaller homes as opposed to, I don't know. Does this disproportionately affect lower income people
So
or households?
generally what we have found is that our low income households are spread across the entire usage range.
Okay.
And so it could be inefficient housing or energy homes, large families living together. So they really go across the entire consumption spectrum.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah, that's what we found. That's pretty consistent with other utilities that have done the same kinds of studies. It is progressive. Utility rates are progressive in the sense of the amount of money that you spend of disposable income relative to what you're spending on a utility bill. So it's progressive in that, or sorry, it's regressive in that sense. However, if you line it with cost, then we have a very large fixed cost component.
Right.
And so what happens from a cost perspective is those who are using less, which they're still paying less, but they're not absorbing their cost. They're actually being subsidized, if I want to use that word, by those who are large consumers. based on cost. So, but the COSA revealed that in the sense that the basic charge was where we were insufficient.
Okay. All right, thanks. I appreciate the context there. That's super helpful. I think I only have two more, John. One more. Actually, I don't see it flagged on here, but I believe I looked at the budget line item for incentives for low income customers. Like the amount that we've set aside for low income households or low income customers is the same this year as it was last year. Is that right? You don't expect that number to go up?
We do periodically evaluate that. And it also is supplemented with customer donations as well. If we find that there's a driving factor, so during the pandemic, we tapped into that. So those funds are available as well, but we do periodically review that.
Okay. And we feel like it meets the need. I know we talked earlier about, well, it was really related to Lieberg, increasing cost and how is that going to affect that? Maybe, actually, especially of concern, the ones that don't qualify for those low income supports and the people that are just above that. But I guess we feel like we're sufficiently covering the base for low income households at this point. Okay. That's all I have. Thank you.
We owe you a couple of answers and
Thanks so much.
I think procedurally, I'll just keep the queue open, and if other people have questions or comments, because after the public hearing, the next is direction anticipated of people testifying. I don't have anybody signed up to testify, so anybody else have any questions or comments, Sonia?
Introducing it, you said something about 3 times the rate to 8%. Was that some kind of coloring on the water? Can you talk a little bit more about that? I'm not familiar.
In the context of the elevation charge proposed increase at 18, I'm just trying to frame it up in that context.
So there's still more there. It's just that we're going to spread that out over. There was just a decision that 3 times the others had.
Part of it and side of the additional layer to
So we'll recover that over how many years? And that should be covered.
each year we're looking to take a step in the right direction there. Year over the year. Conversation the board wants.
But in your estimation, that's the 3-year thing, because you do have a longer term outlook, right? So get to cover the 41%, is that like 3, 4, 5 years? You know what I'm saying? Is that, okay.
Yeah, I'd say it's near term, given where we're at with these updated results at 7.7, we're taking 18% step towards that. So in the next year or two, I would expect that we're.
Like we would do another 18% next year, and then that would be closer.
I'd expect we'd be sized for elevation charges.
How did we decide, or what was the art form there, I guess, in the differences between COSA and then what was proposed on kind of the other rates? Because it looked like some of the other rates were, higher. Again, the gradualism side of that, is that just, okay, we'll add a couple cents to make that, or what's the reasoning or discretion behind that?
Speaking to, for
So you
example.
go back to the slide thing and point out what I'm talking
It's not moving here. Just an FYI, Erin, they're not looking at what you're looking at.
I'm looking at something different from what you're looking at, so.
Just there. I look at what you're looking at.
Commissioner Carlson, is part of your is part of your question then, oh, that's really distracting.
It's John Brown's computer.
I'm changing here, but it's not changing there.
I was just gonna ask if part of your question is related to when we employ gradualism, what period of time are we trying to recover over? Is it 2 years, 3 years, 5 years?
Yes.
That's the base. That's a good question.
So we're looking, so this was a 3-year COSA, and generally we were looking to, by the end of this 3-year COSA, smoothed out and corrected.
Okay, so if you take 3 years, if it's, make the numbers easy, 30%, then you would put 10% on each year, roughly. I mean, once you hit a percent, then it kind of changes. The next percent.
There will be, it's complicated, there will be a new COSA. But at the end of that was part of the multi-year COSA to give us more of a runway to understand where we needed to make changes. And the electric had an example of one where in 1 year it would have been an increase, and the next a decrease. So enabled us to smooth that across 3 years.
Can you go to the one on the lighting? You talked about the gradualism for the street lighting one. That one I don't understand because the COSA says it's a 2-year COSA and there's a 3.43% increase. But then the updated results say it's negative. Surprised that that's negative for one, but then also then it's just flat for that. So is the update an update to the COSA for this year? And the COSA is now saying that we don't need to change rates?
Correct, yes, based on the updated consumption and demand data and customer number data that we've gotten for this year, that the COSA results show that we don't need to raise rates. We did it enough last year that.
So it's covering the cost of that service, basically. Got it. I don't know if you have this information, but John Darklet's asks, so you mentioned that 6% roughly equated to a household that was 100% electricity, it being $24,000 or less would be energy burdened. On the other side of that, what is the income range of those that qualify, roughly the typical household that's modeled there, that qualify for income assistance? Is that 24,000 or is that higher? Is it lower? What threshold do those folks typically qualify at?
I don't have those. I don't have the qualifiers in front of me. Can I clarify though? That was a new measure. So the 24,000 is at our average consumption and would be inclusive of apartments typically that would use less. And that's where we calculate our MHI. And then we work that calculation, and the 34,000, or was it 36, is for our average all electric household, how we show against our comparators. But I'd be happy to get you our income qualifications.
Yeah, if you could just follow up, I'd just like to know, okay, well, we're saying that, you know, we're under the burden, but for those who are burdened, we kind of make up for it in this way, you know, by providing energy assistance, and that those same people are, maybe there's a percentage of them that qualify. Thanks, that's it for me.
Andy, any questions or comments?
It's a really small one. I appreciate the multi-year COSA projection. It's really helpful. And on the slide that says affordable, where it shows where we are compared to our other utilities. This is not specifically for this budget now, but I'm just curious, just for future, when we talk about LEBR, when we anticipate what our costs are going to be, if you could show us a graph like this where it kind of projects like where we might be. I know you can't anticipate what other utilities are going to be doing, but I feel that this kind of chart is really helpful.
I have a question, comments. Why did we change the comparator cities? Well, we used to have Coburg and Crestwell, got two of them in there because their water rates are off the charge. And how come they're not there anymore?
Well, I'm giving you a chance.
Okay,
Can
yeah,
answer it.
I'll try. So one in particular, with that prior comparator chart, we had multiple satellite communities that were all served by Pacific Power. And so when we had them presented in the graph, and we surpassed Pacific Power in the point. This is trying to look utility level, how we stack up.
I'm just thinking about water. And you know, the standard rate in Coburg or Crestwell's $100 consumption. And don't have any of that up there, but we've got 400. Yeah. I'm just wondering which one to me is more comparable, and because there's a lot of people in Eugene that, you know, that kind of just wondered why that changed and basis for that was.
Yeah, he explained the basis. We can actually slice and dice this however
Yeah, I
we
know.
like. It seems like it makes the most sense on the water side to do it by city because most water utilities are based by city. But when you look at the electric side, doing it by utility, because utility territories are much different. Some of them are municipal for a city, but we can, you know, Pacific Corp, for example, covers, you know, a huge swath of territory, but we can modify the cities to include some more local ones on the water side. That makes sense.
I'm just saying, we've done it for years and then it's changed. So just making that kind of observation.
It was an attempt to provide greater clarity, particularly on the electric. If we dropped a comparator that you would like to see, we can certainly add that back in. And we may have missed the mark on getting all the right comparators in this time.
Yeah, I just want to make a couple of observations. The other question is I don't know if it's a policy or not, but we're basically pre-funding second source in the rates you just said. We did that 10 years ago and then stopped and we refunded rates, but now we're pre-funding it again. We made a comment that we're putting money in there. Why aren't we doing that with Lieber?
What I was saying with respect to water there on, so again, for example, the 6% that we're proposing with second source and also the storage work that we have. So we have this capital plan, trying to make inroads on second source being a big driver to that, and that's why I mentioned it. But certainly are trying to position ourselves to accomplish the capital work that we see.
So, but yeah, because I'm saying that because when we start raising rates for Lieber,
It's gonna be, could be monumental.
anyhow, I'm just wondering why we pre-fund one and we don't pre-fund the other.
So technically today, we are not pre-funding second source, but because we have a large infrastructure project going right now with respect to the two tanks, because you'll see we actually do have a budget draw this year. That rate increase is helping to fund that and position us for the debt that we'll need to assume for second source. So there isn't an amount of cash. And yes, we did have an AWS reserve for many years now with respect to Lieber. That'll be one of the options that we'll bring back next year when we open that discussion. Ranging from pre-funding, timing, rate increases with our expected debt issuances and or smoothing that and any combination of the above. So we will talk about that in 2023.
My point is that if bond rates are rising, which they are, and we could put money away now, and we know we have to spend 180, 200 million minimum, I would say, why don't we just 1% or whatever, just get a little bit in there. And because our our cost for our bond money is going to be a whole lot more, yeah, than it is now. That's something that happens, and I'm pretty sure it's not going to be. I'm just wondering if it's worthwhile, so I'm just putting it out there for other people, and not to decide this evening or anything, to make sure that we can address that in the future. So that's it with me.
President Brown, I fully believe that over the next year, we'll be having discussions about the financial plan for Leberg and how much of that we pre-fund, how much of that we leave for flexible borrowing schedules and things like that based on the risk. Most of the costs occur late 2020s to mid 2030s. We have a little bit of runway to develop that financial plan, which could include pre-funding as early as 2024. And that'll be part of the discussion that we have with the board over the next year.
Yeah, we got about 5 more minutes before the public hearing starts. Mindy?
I'd like to propose that we take a 5-minute bathroom break. In that 5 minutes, is that okay?
We're going to adjourn for 5 minutes. We'll reconvene at 7:45. 6:45, sorry. right, I'm gonna reconvene the first 2022 general meeting of, regular meeting of Eugene Water Electric Board. The next agenda item is the public hearing on upcoming year budgets and expenses. Does not have testimony? Testimony. On. Gotta wait for, the next agenda item is budgets and prices direction.
We're asking for board direction tonight on the 2023 proposed water and electric utility budgets and proposal presented in the board materials. And staff will take the direction to prepare final utility budgets, and we will be back the December 6th meeting.
Comments, direction from the board? Look, you good?
You good, Matt? With the question?
Can we turn it off? Thank you. Matt, are you good with the questions you presented that they won't, stop? Okay, with what he asked, does that affect how you come back?
That
With more information.
that detailed revenue is going to be a small.
Any direction? Sonia, you're kind of,
I mean, the only thing that resonated with me really was your comment about, we know Lieberg's coming up, it's going to now to take some of this taken out later, but I mean, it's a rate increase and
I get that. I kind of concur, because if the economy keeps going and inflation keeps going the way it is, rate increase now is not going to be the same as it is a year from now. It's going to be more impactful on the people that it affects them. And so I don't know if it's too late to change it, but and man, you have a comment then, Frank?
Yeah, I have a question, because I think we had the same question either at the last session or before, that my understanding was that if we set aside dollars now, we are regulated to keep our investments at a very low interest rate, and inflation is kicking, and we will effectively be losing dollars setting aside. Is that right? That's how I understood it.
If you consider the fact that it's not our money, then the alternative for customers, I guess my thoughts on so in essence, you're right if you looked at it from a customer perspective. In other words, I can give EWEB money and they can invest it at a low rate. In the meantime, I have other options, or I have an inflation that is outpacing that. I guess I would just suggest to the board that we still have some direction to set. We don't know what the full story is with Lieberg, and until we actually have that, I don't know that I would be asking customers to pre-fund something that we haven't set a course or a direction on yet. I think part of that course and direction is going to be the financial plan, which I think we will develop. So I would not be inclined to recommend that we pre-fund starting in 2023. I suspect we will have that discussion about whether we pre-fund starting in 2024. That would just be my recommendation at this point.
I'm good with it. Staff good with what we have?
Yes.
Basically, no comment is no direction, but what you presented is good.
That's the way I interpreted it.
Thank you.
Bring back essentially the same thing.
Absolutely. I'll make sure I schedule enough time for it too.
President Brown,
Yes.
I would note, because he requested it, that I think we are going to set some time aside for Commissioner Borofsky. I believe at the last meeting, he had requested some time with staff, so we want to be able to entertain him, just so the rest of the board knows that we'll be meeting with him separately.
That's fine. That's fine. And yeah, because I know the budget is his baby. I mean, he really likes that stuff, so let him have it. Okay, well, thank you very much. Very good presentation, and we really appreciate it. The next agenda item is going to be the quarterly operational and strategic goals report. Frank Lawson.
Yes, President Brown, Commissioners, thank you. Good evening. Wanted to go ahead with the next slide, Holly. I think you've got control of it up here. It's hard to imagine that we are reporting on Q3 already, given the fact that this year just seems to have kind of flown by. A number of updates, just generally. Q3 had really our first implementation period for our wildfire mitigation plan, of which the board approved in that quarter. We implemented a lot of it early in the year when the fire season hit. We also, in the third quarter, experienced our first public safety power shutoff the weekend after Labor Day, and know that we briefed the board on a lot of that already. Supply chain issues, I do have to compliment really not just our procurement staff, which has done a really good job of mitigating that, but also the people who work and schedule and plan activities and operations, whether that's responding to customer needs or planning for projects or also planning for emergent work. We've had to shuffle a lot of those projects around to be able to accommodate where and when and how we can manage materials through that. A number of significant project advancements, including East 40th. If you haven't been out to East 40th and peered over the edge, you'll get to see the foundations of 2 tanks, and then when I was out there the other day, almost a circumference completed on the tank to the east, and it's very impressive, very large, and will serve the community for a number of years. So that project has progressed well. We also, in the quarter, for the first time in a couple of years, got some results from a customer survey. This was one that was a little more in depth, asked some different kinds of questions around priorities, not just do you love EWEB or not, or why, but asking customers to prioritize different activities in alignment with our values. And so that was something noteworthy in the quarter. And also, we continue to make progress on a number of the customer facing programs, including our energy efficiency work, which is year to date at 100%, over 100% of its target, but also well under its budget. And some of that is just because of the mix between commercial and residential, as higher commercial content so far this year. And then the ever popular, surprising e-bike rebates, of which I know at least one commissioner has taken advantage of that, and 542 year to date through the third quarter, which is fantastic. And in the meantime, we're still making progress on our goals. I would say that it's somewhere between 9 and 10 of the 14 sub goals. We're still on track. The ones that are, go ahead, Holly, with the next slide. The ones that are not on track are more, we're still making progress, not quite on the schedule that we thought, but we continue to work through our total goals, looking to whether that's a little bit more operationally focused, or also whether we're looking at some of the strategic projects or goals going forward that support our long-term strategy, including work going on with the board around Leberg, whether it's dam safety, looking at the EES, EWEB Enterprise Solutions. Thank you for approving the authority to sign that contract with SAP, which is really a significant technology milestone, of which it's going to take a really significant amount of effort over the next couple of years to not only bring our information systems up to where we need to be relative to our business continuity, but also sort of set the table for some of our strategic work that involves on the energy side, in particular, synchronizing supply and demand and the customer programs that'll support that. And so continue to make operational resiliency work for us. The city of Springfield in the third quarter did give us, I'll say, an endorsement of the project in Glenwood. We also filed an application for rights to federal stored water behind federal facilities. That's a water rights application for further water rights looking forward. And then also, as the board knows, did a little bit of a pivot on the headquarters property, and the board really delegated, thank you very much, that authority to the general manager to continue to pursue opportunities around the divestment of the headquarters property or disposition thereof. So I guess with that, we do have a lot of staff available on hand. We know it's a pretty dense report. One thing I will point out just format wise is that if you do a sort on CAP 2.0, you'll find that in the footnotes throughout the report, you can see where we reference information that's relative to the City of Eugene's climate action plan and reference the section of which we are contributing to the progress of that plan. That's in our normal quarterly reporting. We do have plans to do a new report, which will be the EWEB Climate Guidebook. That'll be out either end of this year, early next year, which will have a whole section on what we think our reporting is to the City of Eugene around the climate action plan as a part of that, as well as some other technical application notes and how we define things like carbon intensity and which, will the real number please stand up kind of papers and technical guidance. And so that's in process, but I did want to point out, as we did make a commitment to the City of Eugene, I think in some of our meetings, that we were going to start to highlight in our quarterly reporting how our work was related to the climate action plan. So we did that this time through footnotes and wanted to make that evident to the board. With that, I'll open it up to the board for questions or feedback. Like I said, we have the assistant general manager and executive team and other managers available if you have questions, and be happy to entertain them at this time. Mr. Brown?
Questions, comments? Tony?
I have a quick question on the current assets in there. It noted that it was in the quarterly report for electric financials. Increased 70 million between 2021 and 2022. Just curious what that is.
It's a classification item for year end. Generally accepted accounting principles or CAP requires us to reclassify investments with maturity greater than 1 year from current to other non-current assets. So the increase in current assets is offset by a decrease in other non-current assets. And the overall change in total assets from 2021 to current is relatively flat.
Okay, got it. All right.
Yeah, that was a great question, Commissioner Carlson. I did look at last year, and the same thing roughly occurred last year. But if you look at the total assets line, it's pretty consistent around that 700 million mark.
That makes sense. Yeah, I just saw that jump and went, "It's a big item."
We bought something when you weren't looking.
All right. And then I know our rate of return metric is already challenged. It's under the target. I'm assuming that Lieberg is not factored in, but that when we do have to factor Lieberg in, that will be offset by a rate increase. Is that the case, or is that or am I off and that will continue to be challenged?
So the value of Lieberg assets have been removed from the net book value for the purposes of this metric. So Lieberg's current and active status is factored in. There are a number of variables at play with this metric, but all things equal, proposed rate increases will help to improve it.
All right, that's what I've got. Thanks.
I did, President Brown, I did talk with CFO Deborah Hart a little bit ago about looking at this metric a little bit differently also. When you think about rate of return, a lot of times you think about rate of return for stockholders or the fact that we're actually in it to make a return. We want to make sure that we have a metric that reflects the interests of our borrowing agencies, but also doesn't lose the fact that we're a public agency and we're cost-based. And so we'll explore that a little bit further. Your questions are right on relative to Lieberg and the impact of rates. But we also want to make sure that over time, is this the right metric to be looking at?
Does the rating agency use that specifically? Is that a requirement? Can we have?
It's a question.
The metrics tell a story when looked at collectively. So ratings agencies utilize a whole host of metrics when they review our records. So this one in isolation will not impact it.
Okay, great, thank you.
Mindy.
A quick question about the Willamette treatment. I know that we're behind and I'm curious, do you anticipate that we're going to be able to catch up to our schedule or will it always kind of?
Well, I'll let either Karen or Wally jump in or Mike Masters. Looks like Karen's appeared.
Hi, everybody. I would say yes. You know, our timeline that we set for ourselves was really individual. And we do expect that, you know, as soon as we get through that land use planning process, we're doing everything we can right now to keep on track beyond that piece. And as soon as we get through that, I think that we'll be able to catch up to where we hope to be.
Questions or comments?
I will verify that, yeah, that's correct, Karen. This is Wally. And we do hope to, you know, we did put a pause. We did shift the project out about 6 months during our last capital planning effort. And so we're on track for that, I think, but we just have to get through the capital planning efforts.
I got a couple questions. Since the headquarters building disposition was in the goals, I noticed in your background, or you said you had 7 serious inquiries and 2 offers. And although I don't want to negotiate it in public and knowing about agendas, but December's full and timing, would we anticipate you coming back to us after the first of the year or before? That's something you don't want to comment publicly.
The board granted me a certain degree of authority to act independently within the guidance that you provided. If pushing the edges of that, I mean, I'll be in contact with the board pretty routinely over the next few months about the status of those, either individually through check-ins or collectively if there's any guidance that I need as the general manager. So probably either one, but I wouldn't expect to necessarily automatically schedule an agenda item for this in December.
Thank you. Other questions or comments? Thank you very much, Frank.
Thank you, President Brown.
The next agenda item is going to be Frank Lawson, the hydrogen pilot project.
Thank you again, President Brown. So last month, I believe Commissioner McCray got head nods from the board for a status update on the work at the hydrogen pilot project with Northwest Natural. I think the suggestion was for January, but this was a fairly simple thing for us to provide an update on relative to the changes that had occurred over the last number of months. The background material that you received really talked about the fact that Northwest Natural, I believe back in, I think it was late July, filed an application with the Public Utilities Commission for the project and really the rate recovery of the project. I do and can inform the board that today, actually, this was not reflected in the background memo, but today, Northwest Natural filed to withdraw that application to the Oregon PUC. They did express to me they are still interested in the project, but they feel like it's important to work closer with the local community on the project. So as of this afternoon, I believe that I think the filing was official as of this afternoon that they are withdrawing their application for this in order to pursue a closer working relationship with the local community on the project. So Our, and the point of this, and actually the slide I included for you this evening was the same slide that has been part of the stakeholder and the outreach, which really expresses very specifically and distinctly EWEB's interest in both the project and then our long-term interests in hydrogen specifically. It does not comment on the area of which I don't believe we're the experts in, which is the blending portion of the project, which I think is where some of the local commentary came from and where Northwest Natural is the expert. And so our message has been pretty consistent relative to the interest we have both operationally in understanding how hydrogen production can work from an electric utility perspective, including demand response and potentially alternative fuels or electrofuels rates, and then the long-term interest around hydrogen as a storage or a fuel source, or either directly or through some intermediate chemistry. So our role has been pretty consistent throughout this, independent of the audience. And that's what are our interests in hydrogen and what are our interests in the project. So I didn't quite expect to give that update today, but basically it sounds like some more information will be coming out from Northwest Natural on what the next steps are relative to the local hydrogen blending project of which EWEB has been a participant. Back to you, President Brown.
Questions, comments?
To be clear, there is no project right now. Right.
There is no project. Our discussions with Northwest Natural, with the Bonneville Environmental Foundation, which has been part of it. I also, on the stakeholder outreach, and I actually put a link to the video that you can see that where they describe Northwest Natural is part of that. They describe their project. The Northwest Hydrogen Alliance is part of that, and then also the Bonneville Environmental Foundation. The project itself, the blending project driven by Northwest Natural, had to go through this regulatory process with the Public Utility Commission of Oregon. They have since, as of today, withdrawn that application.
Other questions or comments? Next agenda item is going to be correspondence and board agendas.
But I guess this is back to me. We had two pieces of information. One was really around some PURPA standards. Those are, I'll say it's really an administrative item as much as anything. And then the other was, and the commissioners may, Jason on the meeting, his 2023 legislative session preview document as well was part of correspondence.
How about the?
Sure.
That is saying that we need to help with the charging station, Google charging stations. Is that what that?
Actually, I'll have, is Megan, I'd like to have Megan jump in. It's a standard independent of charging stations. PURPA defines certain standards of which we meet. We have to go through and review the energy efficiency and other standards according to that. And then file an amend or basically a document that we concur with that by next year. So it really is an administrative process. It probably has no substantial operating impact from that changes anything that we're already doing.
Other thing is that you noted that you were part of the KLCC Rainmakers. And I haven't had a chance to listen to it yet, but I just wanted to, yeah, if we haven't, we should all listen to it.
Yeah, it's always a little tough talking about yourself and your background, but the cool thing was being in the KLCC studios with all the neat electronic stuff and the microphone in your face and all that. That was actually pretty interesting. The rest of it, I'm not so sure. And, you know, well, I don't know that it's under review what I said, but it was fun.
Okay, any other questions or comments? Not, board wrap up. Anybody have anything for the good of the order before I get the gavel? Matt?
Yeah, just thanks for all the presentation tonight, the materials, whole crew. I just continually impressed by the quality and caliber of information we get. Really appreciate that transparency.
We have a work session coming up.
Work session in a couple weeks related to the integrated resource plan. Specifically, we need to make sure that, I just want to make sure that the board's aware as we go through, we have identified all of our assumptions around both the consumption patterns as well as assumptions about future markets and the characteristics of resources. This is going to be, you put all that in the blender and you calculate an ideal portfolio. This is the calculated portfolio. Now, what we fully expect to do after this, because it may or may not align with everything that we think, after this, we're going to have to iterate this. We're going to have to test sensitivities around things like increased electrification, around the expenses associated with locales, such as increases or scarcity of transmission. So we're going to have to go through a number of iterations, but this is the calculated. We put our best crystal ball forward, we turn the crank, and this is what comes out. So that'll be what we want to talk to the board about in a couple weeks. Thanks for pointing that out.
Johnny, anything for comments? Matt?
I said, thank you.
I'm good. Anything else, Frank?
No. Thank you for the questions.
Thank you very much.